Hello, friends. This is just a quick video to comment on the barrage of comments I received after Dan Richards posted his response to my video about the white Atlanteans, white Atlantis, and that stuff. I'm not even sure where to begin. You know, I made that video to address basically two components of what Dan said on the Joe Rogan show. One was that Ignatius Donnelly would have had this really kind of simple biblical view of race. At least that was the implication in what he said. And the other was that he said Donnelly did not believe in a white Atlantis. So I've watched Dan's video now. I only watched it one time, so I may get some details wrong, but I think he acknowledged that, I think he said I was right to call him out on that first part, that the views of race were not as simple as he said or whatever, so that's fine.
Now, Dr. White is correct that the situation is a little bit more complicated than I expressed when I was talking about Donnelly himself. Now, generally speaking, what I said was accurate, but Donnelly himself is a tiny bit more complicated, and Dr. White's right to call me out on that one.
And he took issue, though, with my evidence that I presented that Donnelly most certainly did believe in a white Atlantis. And I used quotes from Donnelly, and I talked about the context and where we were in the late 19th century with the term Aryan and all that stuff. And he had problems with a lot of it. He went on for 40-some minutes. His take, at least what he presented, was that Donnelly did believe in kind of a multiracial population of Atlantis, and he provided a quote to support that. So that aspect of it is fine. So we can have a discussion about what Donnelly actually thought about the racial makeup of Atlantis. Anyway, Donnelly talks a lot about race in that book. My view, after doing my own kind of exploration of it, was that he most certainly did think that Aryans came from Atlantis, and that those Aryans, those white populations, were the civilizers that went around and seeded population in other places. I provided some evidence for that, and I talked about what Aryan meant. You know, Donnelly was not writing in a vacuum, so that's fair to try to understand the context and what those words meant. And it looks like Dan would not emphasize that as much as I did, whatever. So that's an interesting topic, actually, what Donnelly actually did think about race and Atlantis in the context of who's capable of civilization, who's doing the civilizing. And these are things that he wrote about, as did other people of the time. Fine. I don't know how many hundreds of comments my video has on it now. I stopped reading them. The ding, ding, ding was so persistent that I had to tune it out. My YouTube channel is a hobby for me. I do it sometimes on the evenings, but mostly on the weekends. Not even every weekend. Sometimes I'll go for a month or so without making a video. You know, I do stuff that interests me, talk about different aspects of my life, my hobbies, my art. Somebody in the comments said that, I should be ashamed of myself for getting shown up by an electrician on this subject I'm supposed to be an expert in. I'm not an expert in Donnelly. I never claimed to be an expert in Donnelly. I don't know who the experts in Donnelly are, but I do have an interest in pseudoarchaeology, the misuse and abuse of the past, of which there are numerous examples out there. I've written about this stuff and talked about it on YouTube for over 10 years now. It's a hobby. It used to be part of my job when I taught a forbidden archaeology class when I was at South Carolina. I had to develop curriculum and that sort of thing. But I've interacted with a lot of different people on all sides of this. I've had some pretty positive interactions, and some of the people who I've interacted with on the, quote unquote alternative or fringe side, I become friends with. I consider them friends. I won't throw anybody under the bus, but you know who you are. Other people that I've run into, they were complete cons, and they know who they are too. So you meet a mix of different people with different motivations. I do not know Dan, and I doubt that we will ever become good buddies. But I'll tell you what, I do respect his tenacity, and I appreciate that he responded. And he has an argument to make, and that's fine. He and I think, will probably continue to interpret Donnelly pretty differently. If you want to have a discussion about it, Dan, I'm more than happy to. But I will tell you, at this point in my life, the kind of bomb throwing and level of excitement and vitriol over dueling YouTube videos is just not a path I'm going to go down. So topics are interesting, great. You know, if we can have a discussion in a civil way, fine. But like, I'm not going to get into one of these back and forths. I can present my opinion and be civil. You know, there's not that many things you get to control in your life, but one of them is your own behavior. So whatever you guys want to do, get angry at my site. You know, I read comments, people were angry at the kind of guitar that I had behind me. They think I should lose my job. Over a disagreement over interpretation of a 150-year-old book. I mean, where does that even come from? You know, I take issue with a lot of things that Dan said in his video. I don't think a lot of it was particularly fair or even-handed. Maybe he thinks that about mine. You know, but it takes two to fight. So I grew up with a sibling. I know how this works. Anyway, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do the back and forth and the mudslinging and all that. I still have stuff to say on Donnelly, and I will happily address Dan's points, probably to none of your satisfaction, but I will give my perspective on them. And I'll talk about whatever the hell else I want to on my channel. And I'll talk about it when I want to talk about it. This whole pressure to respond quickly and, you know, you're doing all this damage. I don't know what damage I'm doing. You know, I think Donnelly was, and I think Dan acknowledged, you know, he was pretty racist. As Dan says, he has some old school views on race. I think there was no question that he thought that the white race was, you know, the best of them. Like, he was probably a white supremacist. That's what I take from his writings. So why is it so surprising that then he would make this civilizing population from Atlantis white? Does not surprise me at all. Shouldn't be that shocking. And as I said very clearly, you know, I had people coming on here telling me, how dare I say that everybody who believes in Atlantis is racist? I didn't say that. In fact, I said the exact opposite in that video. And in fact, Dan included that clip in his video. Thank you, Dan. Of course, that's not the case. But the book itself is what it is. And we can study that book as a text, and we can study it in the context of the late 1900s. And we can study how aspects of that are used or not. And the continuing idea that there is an advanced lost civilization out there that explains these same patterns that Donnelly saw. Like, that's all fair game. I don't expect most of you people who comment on my channel to agree with me, because I can see where you're coming from, and that's okay. You have your own perspective, but don't expect me to get into some kind of reactive mode where I'm just arguing and fighting and throwing my hands up. That's not the way I work. And, you know, I make mistakes like everybody else does. Do I think that I made one here? Nah, probably not, but I'm willing to look at it, you know. Whoop. That's the alarm for the pizza. Possible. You know, maybe Donnelly, even though he was a racist, maybe he did, you know, envision Atlantis as a big kumbaya of all the races together, you know, civilizing the world together. Maybe that's what it was. I have not seen evidence so far from that book or in Dan's arguments or anybody else's that convinces me that that's the case. So, that's what I've got for now. As far as when I'm going to like address his arguments in particular, I don't know. It's the holidays. I'm busy. I got stuff to do, as does everyone else. And that stuff is a priority over this. But I just want to let you know that, like, I have heard your roaring and I have watched Dan's video. Perfectly willing to continue the conversation in a civil way, at least on my side, which is what I can do. So have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.